You can try. Oh, yeah. Who is? Okay, for everybody in the room, just to be aware that this will be recorded and streamed live. So if you have to go out, please try avoid going through here. You can probably leave through this door in the back. Okay. Yeah, or that. You can crawl through here. Can still talk for 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes. Welcome everybody to this launch of a new edition of the LCP Delta and smartEn EU Market Monitor for Demand-Side Flexibility. I'm Andrés Pinto-Bello. I'm the head of research at smartEn, Smart Energy Europe. I will be guiding you through today's event. First, a word about smartEn. smartEn is, for those of you that don't know, is a business association that represents almost 100, we're at 98 members in the demand-side flexibility spectrum. So from aggregators to OEMs, technology providers, software providers, we cover the whole spectrum of the consumer side that is engaged in the energy system. But today, we're here to talk about what demand-side flexibility or what demand-side flexibility can do or did in 2023. This is the 5th edition of the LCP Delta and smartEn collaboration. And like the development of demand-side flexibility over these past 5 years, the publication has also grown. We are covering more topics. We are reflecting the growth of demand-side flexibility across all these years. And we will see a bit more about that in the upcoming presentation. Just a few words. We have a public version of the report that will be available online as of today. There's also a private version for smart members and for LCP subscribers that you can also access today. But first, we have a very packed or tight and interesting agenda. Of course, the main topic will be the presentation of this report. We will have John and Lucy from LCP that will be guiding us, walking us through this new publication. Then we will have a member of the Commission, we will have a service provider, and we will have a market platform representative. And this is not a setup for a joke. This is a setup for a very interesting panel discussion that will give us a broad spectrum of what is happening in Europe from the perspective of stakeholders, policymakers, and market participants. And then all of this will be, of course, followed up with Q&A sessions. You will have a Slido that you can join. You can ask your questions there. Please don't use the chat box on the live storm. We will only be using Slido. You will see the QR code in the slides, but also just join Slido. Use the hashtag Market Monitor, and that will redirect you to the appropriate page. But before that, I just wanted to take a bit of stock of why this market monitor is so important, what we're trying to do here, because 2024 is quite an important year, not only because there's a ton of elections going on over the world that might change the landscape of policy over the next years. Also in Europe, we will have elections, so this is a transition year, politically speaking. But this doesn't mean, as we will see also by the presentation of the Commission, that the work stops. So it is still ongoing, but it is an important year to take stock of what we have achieved and what has happened over this past five years. And I do invite everybody to do that, to take stock, to even compare the first edition of the Market Monitor in 2019 to this year's edition of the Market Monitor. It reflects these 5 past years also of how the legislation has grown, how the legislation has been implemented, what we have achieved over these past years. I will definitely not want to spoil anything from the Market Monitor, but we have achieved a lot. There's been a lot of markets opening. There's been new legislation being developed. We have now this discussion on the Network Code for Demand Response. So it's really a significant growth that we've been seeing. However, there's also stagnation, and this also reminds us of the importance of these publications, of pushing and bring visibility for what market participants can do and can't do. So it should be a very interesting discussion today. And I want to finish this with one message or what my takeaway for the past 5 years and looking at the evolution of this market monitor. And it is that demand-side flexibility, it was always present, but we have put it on the map over the past 5 years. It has really taken the center stage. And it has really evolved from this obscure term that only us energy geeks understood to a term that also is discussed at kitchen tables, at family events, of how can you react or what can you do to not have to pay astronomers' energy bills, what can you do to integrate your electric vehicle, your solar PV panels, and so on. So this has become, demand-side flexibility has become or has moved from a nice to have to a need to have, not only for consumers, but for system operators, for the energy system at large. And this is something, one of the messages that I would take away from these past 5 years. I think this is also reflected in the Market Monitor, and there's still a lot to do, but I will let John and Lucy introduce us to this new edition of the Market Monitor and the findings that they have come across. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrés. Move on to the next one.
Oh, other way, sorry. There we go.
So at the risk of repeating what you said, this is the 5th version of the Market Monitor that we've produced with you. So I'd like to first of all thank you for the ongoing partnership. and recognition of how far we've come in that time. And also a big thank you to all the smartEn members who've taken their time to review the report that we've produced. It is now a report that's produced by a larger team, and that reflects the breadth and depth that we have now covered, and the extent to which demand-side flexibility is becoming a core part of the electricity system. There is, as you say, a public version that's available on both the smartEn and the LCP Delta websites, a version for smartEn members, and there is also a version for LCP Delta research subscribers that we affectionately refer to as the brick, because it's so big you could stack them up and build houses with them. If you move on to the next slide, the focus from 2019 has really been the implementation of regulations and directives supporting demand-side flexibility across Europe, not just the EU, but the United Kingdom, Switzerland, and other countries as well. And in some ways, it is an indictment of the slow progress that has been made, that we're still talking about the implementation of the Clean Energy Package, when to some extent it's been superseded, or at least augmented, by the electricity market reforms that were announced last year. We've come a long way, but there's a lot more that we do need to do. The principles remain, though. Open markets, accessible to all assets, and transparent information, both about system needs and participation, is still the destination that we're working towards.
So first off, maps is the one that we guys get in the expression, so it's the accessibility. If I have a demand-side asset coming out of access, primarily transmission system operating like I guess the good answer is we've been doing this for 5 years, and the answer is broadly yes. But unfortunately, there's lots of ifs and buts in that. So one of the big differences we've seen this year is the questions that we're getting asked and the details that go behind these maps are far more about the technical and the product shapes and the sort of, as we close sort of in the weeds, it's the really technical details that are prohibiting access for demand-side flexibility. Yes, there's been good developments, as you can see on the sort of the darker shades of orange. So there is definitely a positive note for demand-side flexibility. But things like, can demand-side flex access or minimum bid sizes? That was sort of 2 or 3 years ago, the questions. Now it's utilization rates, it's product shapes, it's interoperability standards, it's behind the scenes that are enabling or not enabling demand-side flexibility. So on the one hand, we're seeing greater accessibility to demand-side flex assets, but we're also seeing more value streams just present for demand-side flex assets to access. Most notably, I should say, in the GB and the Nordic markets. We could probably do an entire presentation on the GB market and all the new ancillary services that are opening, but it's a note to say that 2 or 3 years ago we were doing these maps and it was very much a bog standard 3 or 4 services. Now in some markets it's 10, 11, 12 services that are accessible. To varying degrees, yes, but there are more opportunities for demand-side flex assets to participate. That was the good bits. Unfortunately, we are also seeing some stagnation. It would be great if we could have 5s across most of these markets, but unfortunately, in mainly southern European countries, we're not seeing the growth in the past 12 months that we would have anticipated had we sat here 12 months ago. And there's also been a noticeable delay in pan-European development. The pan-Nordic development is increasing a bit quicker, so that is a positive. But more broadly, the pan-European flexibility streams are, I think stagnating is probably the good term. There's been several delays, even since we finalised these maps a couple of weeks ago. Some member states have said they're delaying their participation. And there's obviously a negative impact. And it links quite nicely onto the series of maps after this about standardisation and increasing accessibility across all value streams in all markets for a bigger range of assets.
So I'd have actually said this is the map that we get most questions on. And it's the one that we've developed trying to answer the question, how big is the opportunity for demand-side flexibility? And the answer, as is usually the case with us, is it depends. TSOs spend a huge amount on balancing the system and maintaining reliability. Not all of that spend, particularly on constraints and congestion, is open to demand-side flexibility, especially in markets like the GB and Germany. There are markets for ancillary services that in most countries now should be open to demand-side assets. And that's what we've tried to reflect with the map. It's the total spend on markets that demand-side flexibility should be able to access. However, as Lucy says, even in markets that are ostensibly open, there are barriers that are preventing active participation. And as for the actual participation of demand-side flexibility in these markets, it's still rather limited.
Before we move on, it's probably worth flagging probably Spain and Poland. They're two markets with a very, very high spend, but unfortunately they are almost entirely prohibited to demand-side flexibility. Either on the one hand because the regulation simply says no, but maybe more troublesome is the markets that say yes on the surface, but when you go into the weeds, when you look at the more technical barriers, it's inaccessible. And that's partly what we're trying to get around with this series of maps. If you read them all in order, you can almost, if I flick back very quickly, the maps that are least accessible sort of coincide with the maps with the highest spend. So it's trying to get this map to be darker orange and be open and accessible so demand-side flexibility can access this value.
And that difficulty in accessing value is reflected in flexibility service providers trying to access other sources of value, which we will highlight in the next few slides. First of all, the growth in flexible assets on the distribution grid, whether it's distributed generation, storage, EVs or heat pumps, is an enormous capacity that can or could provide flexibility to the system. And it's coming quicker than we'd expected. The GB DSO SSEN published in 2021 their future energy scenarios for 2030. What they expected to see on their grid for batteries and EVs and distributed generation from wind and solar by 2030 is already here or in the construction pipeline. And unfortunately, what we're seeing from the development of DSO markets is that that is lagging, with a few exceptions, the growth of distributed assets, leading to more DSOs looking to control those assets or preventing assets from connecting to the grids.
Which leads conveniently onto the residential flexibility map. I guess maybe before the narrative on that, it's worth maybe a little bit of explanation as to what's included in the residential flexibility map. We have deliberately prioritized explicit flexibility, so generating revenue from providing a grid service over implicit flexibility, so a cost saving based on an implicit tariff. That's not to say implicit tariffs don't have great value and they're not very useful to the end consumer. They're just not as technically challenging, and they have been around for many, many years. So we've deliberately tried to focus on the explicit flexibility, looking at how we can increase the accessibility of value streams to these residential assets. So bearing that in mind, you can quite easily see that GB and Sweden is the highest in terms of accessibility for residential assets. I think my most common question in the past 6 months is what's going on with the FCR market in Sweden and how can I access it with a residential battery? So we're seeing pockets of innovation in residential flexibility. I wouldn't say it's a European-wide innovation at the moment. It is very locational based. But the positivity for residential flexibility is the assets are there. Don't quite want to say exponential growth of assets, but rapid and widespread growth of the assets in our homes, in our low voltage networks, in our buildings that could be used for flexibility. Those assets, however, are not always accessible. So again, we're seeing this difference of the markets or the networks might not be there. Are your distribution networks ready to have an EV, a heat pump, and a stationary battery in every other house? Probably not. So we're almost seeing a race for the networks to become accessible, to have market-based solutions to cope for the sheer amount of residential assets that we're seeing develop. So hopefully, as we've been talking about, we've got 5 market monitors. Next year, we'll be able to sit here and go, there's so much more development in that residential sector because that's where it needs to go. The assets are there, we're just waiting on the markets at this point. Which leads on to what I'm calling my residential matrix. There's not an official term for it yet, but it's a way of understanding that not all residential assets are treated equally. And electric vehicles probably the easiest one. So on one of the axes, you've got private and third party. That's who owns the car. Is it myself? Is it a company? Is it a company car? Is it a postman fleet? Other axes is where is it located? Is it charged at my home? Is it charged at my office? Is it charged at an airport? Based on where you locate that single vehicle will depend on what ancillary services you can access. Are you able to access ones within a BRP, without a BRP, in specific geographical locations? A single EV is not necessarily treated the same way, depending on where you put it on these matrix. Here's just a few examples. I mean, we don't have time to necessarily go through all of them, but just imagine if we overlaid the ancillary services onto here. If you're trying to respond to a really fast ancillary service, not necessarily your FCRs, frequency containment reserve, but even faster, your FFRs in the Nordics, your FFR again, different acronym though, in Italy, or your dynamic suites in GB, you need sub-second response times. You can't necessarily do that with a car in a home that you have no control over, aggregated over a national landscape. You can, however, do it, and there are a few examples of EVs in a factory providing very fast ancillary service response times in the bottom right. So it's essentially a car, a single vehicle can be treated in different ways to perform different ancillary services, and therefore the value of that car differs depending on the configurations. But back to the maps.
So the next map, I think, is new this year on capacity markets, and that reflects the fact that capacity markets are now seen as part of an enduring feature of the energy markets. It's not that long since we had a few strategic reserves and capacity markets or capacity mechanisms that were open, that were market-based and open to different assets, started to be introduced. The GB market was followed by a number of markets in France, Belgium. We've seen the pilot in Italy. In Germany, we're expecting the capacity market to first go live in 2028, and we've seen increasing participation of demand-side response in the Polish capacity market. However, even in the markets where demand-side participation is permitted, we are seeing barriers that limit the value that demand-side assets can provide. In particular, the derating factor reduces the value compared to the capacity. Merchant assets, such as grid-scale batteries, can benefit from capacity markets as part of a stack of value that they're looking to access. For demand-side assets that are perhaps a little bit more opportunistic, that the assets are owned for mobility, for heating, the merchant opportunity isn't necessarily such a driver for participation in the markets. So the limited value is reflected in the participation. Is it worth bidding into a market if the value is going to be quite small? If you're not merchant, in a number of countries, we are seeing that reflected in very limited participation of demand-side assets. In one country, in France, we are seeing specific carve-out for demand-side assets in a capacity mechanism, and that's something that may be something that we see more often as capacity markets are expanded across Europe. And then onto wholesale markets, which, as the capacity markets, as the ancillary services, are becoming saturated by grid-scale batteries. Flexibility service providers are looking to access the deeper, more liquid wholesale markets, particularly as flexibility at the day ahead and intraday timescales is increasingly overlapping with the procurement of ancillary services on a day-ahead basis. We're seeing some movements towards allowing flexibility service providers or independent aggregators to participate, but they're very much in their infancy. There are limited opportunities for aggregators to trade with their customers' flexible assets, and that's partly driven in some cases by the lack of a definition or the legal status of an independent aggregator. It's partly the fact that those assets are the responsibility of the balancing responsible party, the retailer, and managing the potential conflicts between those two is one of the biggest challenges in allowing flexibility to be traded in the wholesale markets. We're seeing moves in GB with the network code modification P415, but even there, I think there's a compromise that not all market participants are happy with in how that balance, how that conflict is being addressed.
So our penultimate slide is on the future. So where do we see the markets opening? Where do we see the most activity? The most clear-cut markets are the ones that are hopefully, or they have stated that they're going to open in the next 12 months. Poland being a key example of that. We highly anticipate the markets to open to ancillary services in 2024. That means my previous comment about the accessibility of this value will hopefully open in Poland. So we're very optimistic about that. We're also optimistic about Italy. There are discussions about how they can make their markets more accessible. How they actually translate to practice is a bit more uncertain. And we're also expecting developments in the Nordic markets with their pan-Nordic couplings of both availability and utilisation. But this is all market-based. There are other factors that go into this discussion that aren't necessarily, is this market open, is it accessible? There's things around renewable generation. It's maybe something that we forget when we do these maps, when we get into the detail. Is this as part of the energy transition? Ultimately, we all want this, ideally, to benefit the energy transition. And a big part of that is renewables. So the markets that have historically been quite open, so for example, say GB in France, they will continue to be open, but the reason that we've put them as growth markets is because of their high renewable targets. Similar narrative again for the Nordics. This increase in renewable will mean an increase in need for flexibility, and thus that trickles down to the need to have open and accessible ancillary services for these markets. And there's the other element that we haven't massively touched on, and that's assets. It's the theme that, from a personal opinion, has come out a lot this year in the types of assets accessing flexibility. 2 or 3 years ago, we would have sat here and it would have been gas turbines or CHPs or industrial sites, relatively big loads. Now we are seeing more accessibility for electric vehicles, for heat pumps, for assets that I'd never even heard of, data centers, although I had heard of that one. So it's the idea that it's not just your stereotypical large asset. Nor, however, are we going to value streams that are only accessible to one asset. We're not having battery value streams or heat pump value streams. It's how can we have a universal network where all assets can access. Some will be better than others, yes, but it's almost an open and level playing field. That's what we're aiming to. if we can sit here in a couple of years and go, we have an open, level playing field, then that would be a really great outcome. I'll let you know if we do ever get there. And the last point I want to say that I'm sure John will come on to in a minute is the opportunity for different service providers to enter these markets. So we talk a lot to aggregators, to traders, to utilities. Yes, they all have a role in these markets, but you've also got to think of the smaller players, the tech startups, the asset OEMs, the people that you've never heard of and you didn't think were related to the flexibility space. They have a role to play in this future development map. We do a lot of work with companies that you wouldn't think would be a stereotypical service provider in the flexibility space, but they have great value in it. So it's the idea that flexibility should be open to more than just your aggregators and your retailers, and a vast array of different service providers have a role to play in this.
And so to sum up, before we take questions, either from the audience here or online, progress has been made. We've really, as Andrés said, we've come an awful long way in the last 5 years. But there's still a long way to go. No country on this map ticks all the boxes for the opportunities for demand-side flexibility at a local level for residential assets, in ancillary services and capacity markets and wholesale markets. There's still more to be done, more value that can be accessed, more that demand-side flexibility can bring to the energy system. And yet the clean energy package has already been superseded by the electricity market design. And we are seeing challenges between national implementations and the need for harmonised markets across Europe that would enable the flexibility service providers to trade assets in one country to solve a problem in another. The energy crisis highlighted in the very short term what demand-side flexibility can bring to the system. And we saw a lot of short-term solutions, short-term measures to get through the last couple of winters. But demand-side flexibility is still too much seen as a last resort. And some of the progress that we've seen in some countries in the last year towards opening flexibility markets still favour the larger assets, whether they're the traditional thermal generators or grid-scale batteries, over demand-side flexibility. We've still got some way to go before we see demand-side flexibility as a core part of the energy system that can help reduce costs for consumers, that can help integrate renewables and enable the assets that are appearing on the system to deliver value. Thank you. Andrés, have you any questions for us?
Thank you, John. Thank you, Lucy, for this interesting presentation.
I can switch over, yeah.
Exactly. Will be easier. Well, now we open the floor for questions in the room or online. I do have a question already online, or rather several questions that have been focusing on what is the market that we should focus on, what is the technology that we should focus on, and yeah, I wanted a bit of your feedback. You've mentioned Poland, you've mentioned Sweden or the Nordics as countries, but within those countries, what is the actual market, capacity markets, wholesale markets that you think are the future, or in the next year, seeing what you've seen over the past year evolution, and also what technologies are the more interesting ones for you?
So perhaps if we split that question, I'll take the one on the markets, if you're happy to talk about technologies and assets, Lucy.
My immediate reaction is always batteries, partly because they're inverter-based and therefore they can access most markets. But I think that's also the answer that everyone wants to give. I think batteries are the easiest answer to provide, but it's similar to what I said earlier. There are so many other assets out there that can provide the flexibility. The Nordics have a lot of district heating. They have a lot of electrified heating. Great opportunity in the Nordics for that. If you look into Southern Europe, you've got all the solar generation, you've got the self-consumption value there. So it's annoyingly, people hate us for saying this, it depends, but it really does. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all. It's very much the markets that you're in will be asset dependent. Batteries can maybe span all of Europe, but I think if you're looking beyond batteries, they're far more locational.
And in terms of the markets, which value streams, I think we've come a long way since being able to bid into, say, a frequency response market and get an annual contract or a long-term contract is enough to deliver the business case for flexibility to invest in an asset. And that was the case 4 or 5 years ago, where we saw things like the enhanced frequency response or the fast frequency response 10 pilot in Italy. Value is now dynamic. Markets are becoming saturated, which means that the prices are falling because there are more assets looking to participate than the system operators need to procure in some of the faster acting ancillary services in some of the countries. That's pushing those assets to look to other markets, other value streams to participate, especially going along the value chain towards wholesale markets. And to look for a mix of markets, so the capacity market can provide a base, a stable long-term revenue, on top of which more opportunistic merchant revenue can be accessed. But you're competing with other assets to access that value. So that's changed the way flexibility can access the markets. That a much more dynamic trading operation is required. Being able to access different value streams, looking at implicit flexibility for behind-the-meter assets, as well as explicit flexibility, and not just one or the other, but looking across the whole market landscape and taking dynamic decisions is the way the market's gone.
Yeah. This goes back to the concept of value stacking and the possibility for service providers to access all these revenue streams in parallel. Gone are the days of this one single market that will allow you to survive as a market participant. There was one question online that I wonder if you can go into. It might be a bit tricky, but it is about the actual size of the demand-side flexibility participation in different countries. Because sometimes it seems a bit difficult to put it in context. Do you have any figures or know about how much this actually means in megawatt hour, or in percentages compared to other resources? What are we talking about?
I don't want to say it depends, but it depends. I think on the spot giving a megawatt value would be unwise, partly because it depends. It's largely based on the accessibility or it's not even accessibility, it's the shape of the ancillary service. For example, SVR, it's very quick, so you can safely say a large part of that is probably from a battery asset. If you go to slower response services such as your replacement reserves, the likelihood that is from a demand-side flex unit is far less, partly because you're expected to do the duration for hours, potentially even days at a time. So there are ways that we can take the data in from the markets and look at the ancillary services and then asset datas and make an assumption. But as part of the clean energy package, ancillary services are declared to be asset agnostic. So a lot of the TSO markets don't publish this information. It's not a gettable piece of information because it needs to be agnostic and fair and open to all.
This topic of transparency is then quite interesting, because even if it is agnostic, have you faced this challenge, or do you think that this should be available information? Are we here? Should we be pushing system operators, regulators to publish this information? Like in any other market, you should have access to quantities, prices, and so on. Yeah?
Oh, the reports that we produce are the results of hundreds and hundreds of research calls. And my favourite comment from one of those calls over the last few years was with a TSO. And we asked this question of, how much demand-side flexibility is participating in this market? And the answer was, interesting question. If you find out, can you let us know?
Yeah, that says a lot about, this is something that we definitely should see more of in the next years, especially with this requirement for member states to develop specific plans for demand response, we have to be able to quantify the actual participation in order to be able to make plans.
And I think the more demand side flexibility we see, the more consumers, the more regulators and politicians are less frightened of what we've seen described as rationing electricity. The more we see consumers willingly participate in the markets and benefit from it, the more it becomes an acceptable part of the system. It needs to be a choice for everyone to participate, but we've seen from things like the Demand Flexibility Service in the UK, there are many consumers that have assets that can provide flexibility and the willingness to participate.
Indeed. Yeah, the willingness, I think, is one of the important aspects to remind ourselves that consumers are wanting to do this. Yeah. There was another question that was linked to another one of my favorite topics, harmonization. This is a topic that recurringly comes up. Harmonization of markets, harmonization of data standards, and so on. This question in particular is focused on DSO markets, and what are countries doing, or what have you observed countries like Germany that have a myriad of DSOs, Norway? What are they doing? Are they moving towards harmonized solutions by themselves, or not? Or are they just everybody designing their own little thing?
I think they're trying to do the former but ending up doing the latter. So I think there's a great desire to harmonise, especially at the EU level. But the tricky thing with locational flexibility is it is very locational. So the needs that you have in inner city London is vastly different than the needs you potentially have in Stockholm. So there can be harmonisation in thinking and in approaches, yes. But when you get down to the road or the street or the very specific locational area, it's harder to standardise at that level. I mean, we're struggling to standardise at the EU level for nations at the moment. I think is almost a step too far at the moment to expect standardisation of all DSOs across all of Europe.
Mm-hmm. And in DSO markets, I think one thing that we're seeing is practical standardisation isn't being driven from a regulatory perspective. It's the market, not so much participants, but market operators, the likes of Nodes, Piclo and Electron, that are taking their ideas out to the DSOs, that are implementing them in trials and pilots across Europe, that is sharing that knowledge and the sort of the capabilities to explore how markets might work in the different countries, but it's based on taking their platforms and implementing them in different regions.
Mm. Thank you. Is there any question in the room? Yeah, we have one in the back. We'll pass on the mic.
So, Jeremy Yap, EV Energy. Thanks both for a really fascinating presentation and terrific publication, what I've seen of it so far. Lucy, you talked about technology neutrality or agnosticism, but you also talked about specific services being, it felt like you were saying some were suited to particular assets. So I just want to press you on this a little bit, if I may, because I think you said that we've seen a shift from large-scale generation, large-scale storage assets, and now we're seeing assets, but we're not differentiating between them in those markets. Now, I just wondered whether you had a view on taking account of the fact that most people are not saving for a home battery. A lot of people are saving up for an EV or a heat pump, not very many people saving for a battery. Yep. Are you seeing virtual power plants or enrollments of specific assets as a strong part of that flexibility provision? Or do you really think it's just going to all be agnostic? We have a bunch of assets, they're managed together, they provide this service? Sorry, such a long question.
So I'll try and actually give a succinct answer, not a it depends. Yeah. I think we're going to see aggregated pools of the same asset. So, for example, an aggregated pool of EVs, heat pumps, etc. They might, however, be part of a wider VPP. So it's not saying that you just have a VPP made up of batteries or just a VPP made up of heat pumps, virtual power plants, if you guys aren't familiar with the term VPP. So they might be best suited for one asset, but it's not saying your collective group of assets have to be pigeonholed. And I know you guys have focused on your EVs and your batteries, we can also take that a step further, and we're seeing the state of the battery also being aggregated into smaller units. If you have older batteries, they're less suited for certain value streams than newer batteries. And you can even take it a step further and go customer preferences. We haven't really talked about the customer a lot at this point, but it's, does your customer want you to cycle your battery 10, 15 times a day? Potentially not. So again, we're seeing another segmentation of customer preferences within these aggregated pools. So I guess to loop back to your point of, yes, I see groups of individual assets, but as part of a wider VPP of multiple assets.
I see in the chat room a lot of questions on the slide, a lot of questions on domestic consumers. I'm going to try to sum them up if I can. So one of the questions is asking, what do you see for domestic consumers over the next 5 years to be the best opportunity? Is it going to be wholesale markets, either through implicit or explicit offerings, or is it going to be in ancillary services? And then there's questions around technologies, and maybe you can go into this. There's a question on solar self-consumption, and that you've cited as a source of flexibility. And the question goes in the direction of that they've considered always solar power to be inflexible, which I don't fully agree, but I'm going to ask you the question as the speakers, as presenters today. So wholesale markets and the technologies, how you've considered them.
Well, so coming back to the point on solar, as a generation technology, it is inflexible, unless you've got the panel that's rotating and following the sun. But in general, it is an inflexible generation technology. It's the demand that brings the flexibility, and harnessing the capabilities of domestic assets, if you're talking about solar roof or industrial, is one way of bringing flexibility to that asset. Mm-hmm. One way that can be done is through tariffs and recognizing or reflecting the value of the consumption through time of day, reflecting that if you have solar panels, exporting to the grid in the middle of the day when it's very sunny can actually cause a problem for the grid, and the feed-in tariffs that we've seen actually reward you for inappropriate behavior. So how can we harmonize the markets both for network tariffs as well as wholesale prices in dynamic tariffs to incentivize appropriate behavior all the way down to the household level? But I don't think it's either or. I think that sets your baseline of how do you maximize sort of the flexibility based on implicit and tariff-based price signals. You can then overlay opportunities to provide frequency response or reserves on top of that. And if you are investing in a battery in the home, being able to participate in all the markets is what's going to give you the fastest return on your investment. Mm-hmm.
If I may add a small point on that one, around the domestic consumer, I think it's important to ask the value to whom. Is it the value to the end consumer? Is it the value to the aggregator or to the supplier? How is that divided? And also, how is that propositioned to the end consumer? Do they want a really complicated Venn diagram of all the ancillary services, or would they like a more simplified offering? So I think we can talk about markets a lot, and they should be open and accessible. But there's also the question of how we communicate that to the end customer and their reward, which might be slightly different to what John was mentioning, the value stacking opportunities. They're not necessarily one in the same.
Mm-hmm. There's another question on another technology. They were asking about electric storage water heaters. They had the impression that you didn't mention them, but this is considered as well, right? Like you have considered water heating as one of the most flexible resources available.
Yes. I mean, the short answer for once is yes, it's part of our understanding.
Yes, just to calm down everybody in the chat, this is considered as well. Good, we have 3 minutes left. Is there any question in the room? If not, I would like you to finish up with your own message. What is your key takeaway, Lucy, John, one each?
So I think at the risk of repeating myself, it's that demand-side flexibility should not be seen as a last resort to be activated after all else has failed. It's part of the system. The growth of assets, the electrification of heating and transport means that we can't accommodate renewables, we can't build the network without demand-side flexibility. We need a shift in mindset from the regulators and politicians to see that this is part of the market, it's part of the solution.
I guess my key takeaway is it's going back to the service providers. And there are so many different types of service providers that can access this value. And it's to maybe take a step back and think about the different types of people that can be engaged in flexibility. It's not just your larger players, it's the smaller startups, it's the OEMs, it's the asset manufacturers. They have a big say and a big role to play in this demand-side flexibility.
Thank you, John, Lucy. Very interesting presentation. Now we're going to move into the next part, and we're going to actually check if what they told us is confirmed by market parties, by policymakers, and spoiler alert, I think it will be. But first off, we will have Mathilde Lallemand, who is the team leader of the Internal Energy Market Unit, giving her perspective from the European Commission. But first, John, Lucy, a round of applause. And Mathilde, if you want to join us, you can use the clicker. Thank
you. In the Internal Energy Market Unit, especially on flexibility solutions, demand response, and decentralization. And I wanted today to give you an update on what's going on from the European Commission and DG ENER perspective on these topics from a policy point of view. So first, but I think there is nothing new there, just wanted to introduce that there is clearly now flexibility is seen as a topic to develop. It's clear that the Green Deal and the enormous amount of renewables that we need to connect to the system will not happen without flexibility solutions, because these flexibility needs are growing because of different wind patterns, day and night difference in generation, seasonal patterns as well. So on the left side of this slide, you see the different time frames in blue, so real time, day, week, month, year, and the different technologies that could answer to them. There are many technologies, and we see that demand response is one important of them, probably more on the shorter term, so real time, so hourly flexibility, daily flexibility. And we see on the right side some numbers that were developed by GRC, where we see clearly that so the light blue is 2021, dark blue is 2030, and red is 2050. And we see that in 2030, be it daily, weekly, monthly, the needs will double, and 2050 most likely triple. So it's clearly something that we need to address towards implementing current regulation and policy, and towards future policy. And I will develop this a bit more now. I would like to start with first what we have. In the clean energy package, so electricity regulation, electricity directive, we have already a lot. Here I put the building blocks. So first, obviously, open the electricity markets, all electricity markets, so long-term, short-term, spot markets, balancing, etc., to demand response, including when they are decentralized, distributed, so including through aggregation. And then also incentivize system operators to use this flexibility, because today they can, but maybe they are not pushed to do so. and in particular in a DSO network, where most of renewables will be connected and many problems will arise, in particular with regards to congestions. And with that, we need customers that needs to be active. So the directive already set the principle for active customers, but we also need demand response through aggregation. So framework for aggregation, clear roles and responsibilities, etc. So here I would like to insist that this is there. This is already in the legal framework, and this should happen. And that's why also the monitoring that you are doing, together with monitoring from regulator, Acer has also issued a report early this year on monitoring demand response development and flexibility development. It's key for us to understand, on top of our discussion with member states and on top of our own monitoring, which is mainly about legal transposition, what's happening on ground, what's happening from your perspective, because you can have some member states where the legal framework is fine, but at the end, in the details, in the technicalities, barrier remains. So this is very helpful, the work that you are doing through this kind of monitoring. Now, moving to the next steps, we are working, or more, NSOE and EU DSO entity together with the stakeholders are working on a new network code on demand response. So as you may know, in the electricity regulation, the Commission is empowered to adopt a new network code on demand response, including rules on aggregation. And this network code aims at complementing the existing framework, which I just described, and addressing the remaining barriers. I think we should be careful. This is not the silver bullet. As I said, implementation is key because this network code will build on top of what we have already in the legal framework. And this network code should address, seen from today, market access, so aggregation models, roles and responsibility, how you settle, how you measure, so baseline as well, how market parties can enter this market, so process to engage in this market, pre-qualification, what kind of products you would have on these markets. And I saw in the presentation that these kind of questions were now coming as barriers. Market design for congestion management and voltage control, which are quite new because the directive says that DSOs can use flexibility for congestion management in a market-based way. But now how? Who would be operating this market, what kind of platforms, how it interacts and fits with the other markets, so spot markets, balancing markets, and so on. And also TSO-DSO coordination and data exchange. So we hope with this text, the remaining barriers will be addressed. Now coming to the planning, NSOE and EU DSO entity should submit their proposal in May, and then Acer has 6 months to review it, and then it comes to a Commission desk. We will review it and then start the discussion with member states and hopefully have a finalization next year. And looking forward, so in parallel to this development, the electricity market design has been reformed or adjusted on some elements following the energy crisis. And there was one of the pillars of this reform, beyond addressing the crisis, was also to boost flexibility solutions. Because we really understood that with the increasing amount of renewables that we need to get out from this dependency on fossil fuel, we would need more flexibility. And there are new provisions that has been decided and that may also impact quite a lot this domain. So first, member states will have to assess their flexibility needs every 2 years, meaning that we will put a number on this. We will put numbers on how much flexibility is needed, and in particular, demand response and storage and other possible non-fossil technology. And a very important element to have in mind is that this assessment will be national, but should be done based on a European methodology that would be developed with DSOs and with TSOs and stakeholders. That's very important because that will be really the basis for having flexibility needs that are comparable. And based on this assessment, Acer will also make some recommendation of cross-border relevance, but some recommendation for further developing flexibility and for addressing these needs. And then member states will have to put a number on the needs, so objectives for non-fossil flexibility, and in particular demand response and storage. So it's quite important because there will be indicative numbers for demand response to be reached, meaning that the question which were addressed, like some actors that cannot measure, we will have to progress there. We will have to be able to measure and to put numbers on these developments. And then, if need be, member states are entitled to develop support schemes on top of market mechanisms to further support these technologies. And system operators, we try to push them towards to use more of these solutions, because for sure there is a massive need of investment, but the speed and also the funding may not follow. So we need to have other kind of solutions, and we need to incentivize system operators to use this. So this was to give you an overview of what's going on, so what we have today, what we are developing, and what needs to be developed in the future. And I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mathilde. We will have a Q&A at the end with all speakers. But yeah, the same process applies. Slido for questions. But now we will have Stefan Doerig. He's the head of regulatory affairs at Tiko Energy Solutions, and he will bring the service provider perspective. Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you, Andrés, and also thank you, Lucy, John, and Mathilde for setting the scene so far. I have called my presentation a reality check. What I mean with that, you will see in the next couple of minutes. But first, I would like to introduce Tiko to you. Tiko is an aggregator and a technology provider for home energy management, smart charging, and virtual power plants. So we are an aggregator. We were founded 2012 in Switzerland, still operating there, one of the oldest big VPPs for residential assets since 2013. Since 2019, we are part of the ENGIE group, so more or less perfectly 5 years ago. We have 60 plus employees working from our headquarters in Zurich and offices in Paris and Milano. During our long journey, we have had clients and projects in Europe, but also in Australia and New Zealand. You see the geographical scope on the map on the bottom right. And yeah, let's do the first reality check, how that looks today and how that looks in comparison to the market monitor. So if we have the map that I've shown you before of Tiko's activities since our existence, since we were born, you see two things. The first one, it's pretty good match with exception of the Nordics, I would say. I'm not saying who is following whom here. A second thing, what we also see is that during our long journey, we have been everywhere, more or less. So we have covered quite a lot of countries. Have we been successful everywhere? No, we have not. And that is also why the Tiko business focus is rather different today. It's still a good match, I would say, with the monitor, but it's much, much more focused. We left Australia, we left the UK. We're a small company, and yes, you learn a lot in these new markets, but if you want to grow in highly competitive markets, you have to be ready to invest. So lesson number one for us was, if you can commit a meaningful number of resources to a dynamic market, then leave that market. Lesson number two is leave Germany. I'm only half joking, or maybe 1/3 joking and 2/3 serious. As an independent aggregator of household assets, it eludes me why Germany is in dark orange. Tiko has worked with Sonnen, for example, in the past. We have had numerous pilots with electricity providers and others. We have tried it over and over again with little success. So in Europe, we left Germany and the UK. We still have pilots, as you can see, in Italy, the Netherlands, and Belgium. That's also because of ENGIE. Our core markets are Austria, Switzerland, and France at the moment. Austria, because we have a large client there, which is losing our technology. So we are a technology provider in Austria. In Switzerland, we are an independent aggregator. As I said, still operating quite a large VBP with residential heating assets mostly. That leaves us with France. In France, we are a solution provider to our mother house, Engie, but we are also at the same time an independent aggregator, B2C, going in the same markets for clients. And it's worth to have a closer look also in this discussion and to ask ourselves, why are we focused on France, and why do we believe that, at least at the moment, France is basically the place to be for an aggregator of residential assets. I'm always talking from the perspective of an aggregator of residential assets. So one of the reasons, let's say, for success in France is the assets per se. So in France, we have around 50 million of electric heaters. They're just waiting to be connected and controlled and used for demand-side flexibility. But the other thing is market access. And here, again, let's have a look at the monitor. And this is the monitor, or one part of it. Probably you know the number of the slides. I don't, but it's detailed analysis of the French market. And we can see the factor of success in France when you know where exactly to look. So first, for us, first factor of success is, in France, you have a separate tender for aggregations of small loads in the capacity market. It's called the AOE, which allows us to plan in the long term, and it gives us quite a lot of financial sustainability. Technology neutrality sounds nice, but it does not work if the technologies are too different from each other. In many countries, capacity markets are open for DSF, but if we as an aggregator, and a growing aggregator of small loads, are competing with DR from industry, or also with power plants, it's not so attractive anymore. So in theory, they're open, but in practice, they're not really. So not in France. There we have a separate tender for, let's say, dedicated to us, and this allows us to grow our business. The second factor of success is the opening of the AFRR market, so secondary reserve, R2 in France, in July 2024. We and our partners, we have fought quite a long time for the opening of this market. It's a good market, to put it bluntly, with good prices. Not for forever. We've heard that. We expect that prices are falling here as well, with growing supply, not only from DSF, but also from DSF. And that is why the third factor of success plays a very important role too. This is the access to the wholesale market through the so-called NEBEF mechanism. In any case, I would say, if you have a kind of basis to grow, then at some point, the access to wholesale market is the holy grail for demand-side flexibility for aggregations like ourselves, simply because the other markets are too small for everybody and prices will drop. And the last point I want to add is a simplified pre-qualification process for growing pools. In many countries, you have to pre-qualify for every megawatt, basically, which takes you 4, 5, 6 weeks each time. In France, we have agreed with RTE to a simplified process, which again gives us the opportunity to grow quickly, especially since we are working with heaters. We only have the heating season, which is half of the year basically. So we grow in that time, and we must earn our revenues also in this time, and do not want to be hindered by that. So the rules, don't get me wrong, the rules in France are far from perfect. It's not the perfect world that you imagined. But France is at least one of the countries where true scaling at the moment is possible as an aggregator of residential loads. And this is important afterwards also for the discussion within the existing regulatory framework of the European Union. And with that, I would like to finish, and I'm looking forward to questions and the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you, Stefan, for this look into France. We're now going to have the next presentation, and for that we have a representative from the market organization, let's say the market platforms, and we have Kora Töpfer. She's the head of German Public and Regulatory Affairs at Epex Spot. Kora, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Andrés. Thank you for the invitation, and I welcome a lot. This new edition of the Market Monitor report. It's very important to have transparency, and that's an important basis for taking the right decisions to further develop the demand-side flexibilities. I would like to comment on what the previous speakers have already been said from the perspective of a market operator. So Epex Spot, we operate the physical short-term electricity markets in 13 European countries, here in orange, so the day and the intraday markets. We have 390 trading members that buy and sell electricity on our platform, and overall a total volume of 717 terawatt hours has been traded last year on our platforms. That corresponds to 1/3 of the European electricity consumption. Jumping directly into the flexibility topic now. When we look at the different market segments, so from our perspective, a lot of flexibility is already successfully commercialized on the day-ahead and intraday markets. This has to do with some market design features we introduced long time ago, like the 15-minute product that we started introducing in 2011 already, that entered into European legislation in 2015 and will now, for example, for the all European day-ahead markets being implemented next year, 2025. It has also to do with reduced lead time. We, over the last year or many years ago, we started already reducing lead time in Germany, for example, to 5 minutes since 2017 already. And all this makes that when we look at the trading members on the day at intraday markets, we see already a lot of flexibility, or we see already these flexibility providers active here. So, for example, industrial consumers like BASF, ThyssenKrupp, Currenta, for example. Or we also see an increased number of companies commercializing the flexibility of electric vehicles like Elli, Volkswagen brand, or also the mobility house, for example. We have additional flexibility providers like Centrica or Octopus. All these companies already active on day and intraday markets. We also, and I saw this also in the report, the BRP problematic. So we also more recently developed or are developing new membership models, like the passport and group membership model, where you do not need, and in particular to reduce barriers for small market participants, including FSPs, where you do not need your own BRP, but you can use the BRP from an existing already trading member or of your parenting company. So this for the wholesale. For the balancing market, we see same mechanisms to reduce barriers as well. Smaller granularity and also reduced lead time also enable here better participation on the balancing markets. But where we see still a lot of untapped potential for flexibility that is not being used today, that's the usage of flexibility for congestion management. And here, this has particular not only the possibility, when you use it in a market-based way for congestion management, not only the possibility to develop existing and new demand-side flexibilities, but in particular also it's a great tool to reduce grid investment costs. And one last comment here. So it was also already addressed, the topic of interoperability. So from our perspective, interoperability is very important. So to give all different market actors a barrier-free access to all these different markets, wholesale, balancing, new local flex markets. This, from our perspective, should be best ensured through standardization of products, of processes, of technology. And this does not require the transmission of bits from one market to the other. This would raise a lot of questions concerning algorithm and the overall transparency of the market price signal, for example. When we look at the initiatives that we see already today all over Europe regarding the market-based procurement for flexibility for congestion management, I would say it's quite a positive, dynamic and encouraging map that we can see here, and I would just like to highlight 2 projects where we are involved from Epex Spot. It's a new cooperation that we have since January with the largest DSO in Great Britain, UK Power Networks. We will develop and operate a local flexibility market here for this DSO. They serve 8 million consumers in the London and southeast England area. And here what is interesting to highlight as well, it's a fully commercial project, or a fully commercial market. It's not a pilot project, not a research project, but it's a fully commercial application of our local flexibility trading platform. And the trigger here for the DSO was to save £410 million of grid investments until 2028. That was the trigger. And it will be possible not only short-term flexibility procurement day ahead, but also long-term flexibility procurement. Another project we have in one of the other front-runner countries in Europe, it's the GoPax platform. That's an initiative of both Dutch TSOs and DSOs. And also here, real congestions are solved. So not a research project, but real congestions solved. And we just connected our trading platform last year in June to this platform. And this is a win-win for both sides. So on the one hand, the system operators can have more flexibility on their hands to solve their congestions in the most efficient way. And on the other hand, the flexibility service providers, they have an additional market to value stack, to commercialize their flexibility in the best way. Several other projects, but I won't have the time to go into more detail. But in general, these are a lot of lessons learned that can also be used in other countries that lag a little bit behind, like Germany, for example. And it shows that it's no science fiction anymore, but it's real now. It's now time to move from pilot projects to commercial applications of local flexibility markets for congestion management. So from Epex Spot side, we develop for several years now local flexibility platforms for congestion management. Here is a general overview how in general this can work. So on the one hand, you have the flexibility demand can come from TSOs and DSOs. On the other hand, you have the flexibility supply. It can come from any consumer or producer that can, compared to a baseline, in a flexible way adjust their consumption or production. And of course, the asset needs to be physically in the area of the local flexibility market because it's about solving real congestions. And just to highlight several design features of this local flex market platform, because we integrated a lot of learnings that we acquired from previous projects, like for example, the ENER project we ran several years ago in northern Germany. So it's an end-to-end process from registration to flexibility reservation, activation, settlement, and then display of the market results. So this also to reduce barriers also for smaller market participants, that you're really accompanied from the start to the end in the most easiest way to access this market. Then it is not only possible short-term flexibility procurement in megawatt hour, but also long-term flexibility reservation. This is something that we highlight sometimes in the context of in countries that are afraid of increased-decrease gaming between the intraday market and these new local flexibility markets, Germany, for example. because when you have both long and short-term flexibility procurement, then you make gaming riskier because it becomes more foreseeable, less foreseeable if you will actually be activated or not. It is auction-based because we learned from the ENER project in northern Germany that with an auction you can even more better bundle the liquidity in this market, and also, yeah, I mean, from an economic theory perspective, in an auction you can better optimize the overall economic social welfare. And then important last feature is also the DSO-TSO coordination. So we are happy to see this also as a dedicated own chapter in the network code demand response. This reflects this importance to improve here the processes. And we implemented kind of a coordination tool also in this platform. For example, when there are conflicting bids between TSO or DSO, then this will be highlighted, and the system operators can then react to it to avoid conflicting bids. There was one comment or I liked one sentence I read in the Market Monitor report saying it's not, or the barriers are not necessarily lack of interest in from the market, but it's sometimes the rules of the game. And here's a little bit a list from our top priority routes of the game where we would see need for further improvements to really make use or further increase the use of flexibility in all these different market segments, and in particular for congestion management. So regarding the first and most important one also is really to promote more strongly the market-based flexibility procurement of congestion management. And we see, regarding the network code, we see a lot of improvements already here in the proposals, but we still see the need to ensure in a even more improved way the full compliance in all the different member states with the clean energy package provisions, because the European target model is clear: market-based flexibility procurement by DSOs and TSOs, but not in all countries it's applied. I mean, you mentioned Germany, for example, that you now left aside. Germany, who used exemptions and did not fully implements Article 32 for DSO flexibility, market-based flexibility procurement. So here we would see some need to monitor and then develop measures how member states can really fully ensure compliance with the clean energy package provisions. And and maybe the other recommendations we can maybe go into more detail in the following discussion. But this would be our list. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kora. Thank you. I think you can stay here and invite Mathilde and Stefan to come back onto the stage, and we will have panel discussion or answering some questions that have come up also during these presentations. Again, Slido is down in the corner. You can access it. But I want to start with a question that goes in two directions based on the fact that one is a policymaker and the others are market participants. So what would you like the new legislation to solve for the market participants? And for Mathilde, what do you think it will solve? Let's see if we can match both answers.
I think you should ask me for, otherwise I will just say the same.
Exactly.
And I'm done.
That was my plan. First, Mathilde, please.
But I think I tried to answer this question also in the presentation. What we want, obviously, is to address the remaining barriers. So that, I'm conscious with that. I don't answer much. But I think, we need to build on top of what we have. And we hope to solve this question of, local markets for congestion management are new. We see that it's not, as you said, it's not science fiction anymore. It's happening. But we need to find the right balance between having enough local specificities enabled, because there is no one size fits all, but having also a framework for that. There was also a question on harmonization. there are things that needs to be harmonized, as you said, product design, rules for market access. I think this simplified pre-qualification that you mentioned from tiko perspective in France, this kind of things should be developed to enable smooth market access and to be sure so that these new markets are, as you said, completely interoperable and fit into existing markets and does not develop in their little corner.
Kora?
Yeah, happy to go on. So some things have already been said to further foster market-based flexibility procurement and also on interoperability, but maybe I would like to highlight 2 additional points. So one where we see a barrier and where would like to see improvement is regarding the incentives for system operators to engage in these flexibility or market-based flexibility procurement. So this means that their costs that occur on their side to procure flexibility in a market-based way need to be recognized and need to be recovered or recognized. And we see in some countries, I think we can learn from good or best practice experiences we see in some countries. UK, for example, frontrunner on these topics, implemented a two-tax approach. So not only rewarding, the grid investments, but also of finding a good balance between also the soft non-wire solutions. So this can be one way. And then in addition to that, what would also be important to improve and can still be a remaining barrier, the DSO-TSO coordination. So, because this will help to make the most efficient use of all the different flexibility assets that are there, to use them in the most efficient way at all the different voltage levels.
And Stefan?
Nothing.
Nothing?
No, not a lot. Let's say not a lot of new things. I mean, you've heard me. The reason why France is for us now a good place to be is because they have implemented the clean energy package basically faster than others. It's far from perfect, but again, it's for us the place to be. If there were some wishes, of course, would be a push from the European side for those things that we think work or have proven to work. I mentioned it, separate auctions, separate tenders for small aggregations of small loads. Another thing that pops into my mind is, for example, more also transparency with regard to capacities that are already pre-qualified by TSOs. The numbers are there. We don't know why they're not public. It would help us. Also there in France, we have pushed a little bit, and they at least published a little bit, and that helped a lot. So it's more, let's say, a push for those from the European level on other countries, or maybe we find also best practices elsewhere. Find the best practices and push them within the framework that exists to other countries.
Thank you. So implementation, I'm hearing. Mathilde, what do we do with DSOs, TSOs that are lagging behind? There's a question in the Slido. How can we encourage system operators that are lagging behind? Has the Commission a plan around this? And what is the vision of the Commission for alternatives to markets until we get there? The question concretely is on peer-to-peer trading, energy communities. I see this as complementary, but what is the vision of the Commission to push this lagging, these system operators that are lagging?
So for now, what we discuss with member states and NRAs on the situation and the barriers they face and why the implementation is lagging behind. So we use our own data, but as I said, it's more our own analysis is more on legal implementation. So we also use the different monitoring, be it from Acer or this kind of monitoring that you are doing, so that's why it's very important. And then we try to discuss with them and understand and try to share knowledge and best practices around that. So so that's what we are trying to do now on alternatives. Indeed, in the network code, we speak about local markets for flexibility because ideally, this should be market-based. Now, there are other approaches. We like to use terms of toolbox. There are different ways to solve this. We also, in the EMD reform, talked about flexible connection agreement. This could be a tool. There are also rule-based approach, but these tools should be used. It should be justified why we use this tool and not this other, and there should be a right balance into that, and avoid closing completely markets.
There's a couple of questions on technologies and challenges that technologies are facing. And concretely for the German market, there seems to be a lot of a big German audience. Tiko, Kora, Stefan, Kora, you're not the company yet. What prospects do you see, or what challenges do you see for technologies like EVs and small battery storage in Germany? What is it so challenging? Kora, do you have any challenges to access market platforms with these technologies?
I would say, regarding the German case, I mean, we see already that flexibility service providers, that flexibilities are commercialized on day at intraday, in particular maybe intraday markets, because here you can trade until delivery or almost until delivery, and so on. But I mean, regarding congestion management, I mean, the technical solutions, they are there also for Germany, and flexibility service providers that would like to offer their flexibility also on these markets, they are also there. There are also in Germany system operators that face considerable congestions and would also like to use them or to solve them in a market-based way. But it's not possible from a regulatory point of view. These costs are not, the incentive regulation in Germany would need to be reformed. Clean energy package provisions fully implemented. So the technical solutions, I would say they are there, interest from market there, but not possible from a regulatory side yet.
Yeah, and to change the question then a bit, to not repeat, Stefan, what is your perspective then on technology neutrality? We're looking into individual technologies. What is your experience with this concept of technology neutrality in Germany or in Switzerland? Or
yeah, we know it best in France, but it's the same. It's exactly the same everywhere else. And I've said before that it doesn't make sense that if you have, well, technology neutrality makes sense per se, but if you compete in a market with technologies that are too different, it doesn't work. And there might be other reasons, but the most obvious one to me is economies of scale. If you have a flexible power plant, like a hydro power plant, which we have a lot in Switzerland, you build them, I don't know, five years, but then as soon as you press the button, you have 1 gigawatt that is entering the market. This is not the case with an aggregator of small loads. You start with a very, very small aggregation and you build up. So if you have to compete with 10 megawatt against 1,000 megawatt, you always lose. I'm happy to compete with 1,000 megawatt against a 1,000 megawatt hydropower plant, but not before. If you do apply this technology neutrality from the very beginning, you do not let the small aggregations to grow.
Thank you, Stefan. So we're reaching the end. I just want one sentence from each of you on the challenges of the future. Okay, we've talked about what has been limiting you until now. What does the Commission see as a challenge that might come across the next 5 years, let's say?
Personally, I would say that to put a focus on the demand side of things and to see what's going on there and what flexibility we could say we could have.
You could harvest from that. Yeah, Kora?
Yeah, I would say that in the past few years, also the automatization of trading will hopefully also help to further make use of all this flexibility potential. We see that automated algorithmic trading helps the integration, or already helps the integration of renewables into the different market segments, and this will also help the flexibility assets to better being commercialized on the different markets. We see already today 7.9 million orders submitted every day to our intraday trading platforms, about 450 automated by APIs connected to our systems. And yeah, so we invest a lot in further improving these the automated or our systems to further enable the automatization of trading.
Stefan,
From a
one challenge.
From a business perspective, it's value stacking and scaling. From a system perspective, we should not forget cybersecurity, which might not be a problem right now, but could become one overnight. We should be prepared for.
Okay, perfect. With that message, a round of applause for our panelists for their presentations. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending this Market Monitor launch webinar. I want to close this with just one message that I think Kora mentioned very well. This is not science fiction. The mindset flexibility is here. It is there's interest by market parties to provide it. There's interest from system operators to purchase it. We have to close this gap. And I hope that in the next 5 years, if we're here all again and we compare today's Market Monitor to the next Market Monitor in 5 years, I hope that we get everybody has a 5 in the scale, and we have advanced in this sector. Thank you, everybody, and have a nice rest of the day. Thank you. Recording is off. Yeah, perfect. Good.